Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm Richard Sykes. I'm the host and the creator of Conscious Conversations. So I'm excited to have you all on here today. I'm also really excited to introduce the co-host, who is Jonathan. He'll be joining me in a second. And obviously what we're going to talk about today is how to be more authentic. And I'm sure that Jonathan is just as excited as I am on this topic. So I will introduce Jonathan, and just to give you an idea of who Jonathan is, I've been lucky enough to be in his company, not only as a friend, but as a coach, a fellow empowerment coach. And we have held coaching circles, and we've opened up and shared some beliefs and some vulnerabilities, insecurities at times, and we've really allowed ourselves to be authentic in front of each other. So that's why I'm sure that we'll both enjoy having this conversation together, and I hope you are able to get as much as you can from this conversation. Just to give you an idea of how this will run, it'll be running for about 1 hour. If at any point you have any questions throughout this 1 hour that me and Jonathan are talking, just ask the question in the chat box, just type in your question. And then once we get round to the questioning part, I will read out the questions, and me or Jonathan or both of us will discuss the question. And I'm sure that one question that one person asks will maybe answer a lot of other people's questions too. So I will now invite Jonathan to come on board and introduce himself. How are you doing, Jonathan? I actually can't hear you. One second, let me. Do you have it muted or?
How it works if I plug in.
There we go. I can hear you now.
Okay. I didn't change anything? Okay, magic.
Oh,
good.
Cool.
Okay, yeah, it's really awesome if you can hear each other if you want to have a conversation. So that's a good prerequisite.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man. So I'm excited to be talking about this topic with you. I was just explaining to those that are watching that we've been in many coaching circles together. We've allowed ourselves to be open and at times vulnerable. And I don't know about yourself, but authenticity is such an important thing for anybody to have and to be able to align with. But before we actually dive into this, into the how to be more authentic, one thing I want to discuss very quickly is more the why people are not being authentic, and why it seems to be such a challenge for people to be authentic, to be themselves. And something interesting that comes to my mind is that we've all experienced that authenticity, that pure ability to be ourselves at some point in our lives. And we just have to look back to when we were children, and when we were able to be completely ourselves without any filters, without any resistance. And the only thing that we wanted to do was be ourselves, express ourselves, go out and play and enjoy life. And that pure authenticity that was running through our entire being was a very clear sign that we've already been there. So it's interesting how we've experienced it, and what I see really happening to pretty much all of us is that we are pulled away from that natural connection that we have with ourselves, the authenticity, the true self that we embody when we're children. We love being ourselves, and we are conditioned through our environment, through our upbringing, through our parents who do the best that they can with the tools that they have, trying to teach us how to maybe survive in this world and to do the best we can in this world. But unfortunately, a lot of what we're told, a lot of the beliefs that we have passed down to us turn into maybe limitations, limiting beliefs, fears. And I really see this as one of the primary reasons why we are not able to express ourselves, because we kind of develop a separate self. Some may call it the ego. I refer to it as the conditioned self. And this conditioned self holds all of our limitations. And it's kind of like a barrier between who we truly are and the world. And we identify with this conditioned self as who we are. And we identify with it so much that we kind of become that person. And that is, in my eyes, one of the main reasons why we find it so difficult to be authentic, because the thought of change, the thought of being authentic in an environment that is predominantly fueled by a need for acceptance, brings up a tremendous amount of fear, a fear of rejection, which is one of the biggest fears on the planet, right? And so then we keep ourselves in this box of carrying on acting through this conditioning, through a need to be accepted, so that we don't experience rejection. So that is essentially that's where the pain really comes from in my eyes, that we know that we want to be authentic and we love being ourselves and being authentic, but we fear it. So it's quite crazy.
Wow, yeah, that was so rich what you already said. There was so much in it. When you were talking about how we were as childs, I could totally see you as a child playing around with so much energy. And isn't that the beauty of children, that they have unlimited energy? Wow, it's so powerful.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever talked about the American philosopher Ken Wilber, but I guess you're familiar with his work, right?
Who, sorry?
Ken Wilber?
I've actually never heard of Ken Wilber.
Then I'd like to share something with you, because he has a really interesting perspective on this. He's a philosopher who studied a lot of Western philosophy, but also a lot of Eastern traditional spirituality, and he brought these two worlds together, basically.
Okay.
One of the distinctions that he makes is that we have a true self and what he calls an authentic self. And the distinction that he makes is that the true self is who we really, really are in a spiritual sense. So that is in the absolute realm, where we are unseparate, where we are united, where we just are unmanifest potential and energy. And then as soon as we enter the manifest realm, we enter duality, and we have good and bad and all these distinctions that don't exist in the absolute, but that exist in the relative. And this is where we spend most of our time, I guess. So in the relative realm, there's the authentic self, but he distinguishes between the true authentic self and the false authentic self. So the true authentic self is basically the unfiltered energy that arrives at us from the realm of the absolute, where we are in our fullest potential. And then if you come to the false authentic self, that is because all the filters, the conditioned self, that is what you described, or the ego. The false authentic self is limited by our shadow, basically. So all the conditionings and fears and anxieties, the shame that hold back our potential, they form our false authentic self. And so in his idea and his theory, the idea is really to develop more and more from your false authentic self to become the fullest true authentic self.
Nice. Nice way of looking at it. Yeah, I completely resonate with that, and it's interesting how when you think about how difficult it seems to be authentic for me, and through probably experiences we've both been through, realizing that when we are authentic and being ourselves, it's actually effortless.
Yeah.
And again, I like to use when we were children again, because that's the best example I can give, is that when we are playing and just being ourselves, there's no trying involved, there's no effort involved. It's not like we're waking up and thinking, today I'm going to try and be me. It's just we're just being ourselves. There's no effort involved at all. But as we grow older, it seems to become this concept that is very hard to attain. It's like we have to work very hard in order to be ourselves, and it's crazy when you think about it. That this effortless and natural and completely organic way of being turns into this achievement that we all kind of strive for, this authenticity, the desire to be able to just be ourselves, because we experience it and we have maybe flashes of it as we grow older, and that true authenticity makes us feel amazing. So when you really look at it and you start to peel it away, like I started to realize that it was taking way more effort to not be myself than it was to be myself. In fact, you start to really see when you're able to become, I suppose, more conscious of your behaviors, mainly subconscious behaviors, patterns, fears, limiting belief systems, that when you become more of an observer and you start to be able to let go of these behaviors, you realize how much effort you've actually been putting into maintaining this false authentic self, like you referred to it as, or the conditioned self. And it's like you realize this maintenance of this false self does consume a considerable amount of energy, because we're constantly thinking about how we should be in order to be accepted, in order to be able to fit into the environment we're living in. And one interesting thing that I experienced recently was I went to a party of a friend of mine, and we were sat in a group, like a circle, and everybody was talking. And I didn't really feel engaged in the conversation. I think it was about politics, and I was a little bit like I felt disconnected from the conversation, but it was fine because I just kind of observed what was going on. But I really witnessed how much the people in this group were kind of, it was a competition. It really turned into like this competition of who can be the most interesting. And this isn't a judgment, it's just an observation. And to see how everybody was interjecting into the other person's conversation before they finished. If somebody had something more interesting to say, they jumped in, and it wasn't really a conversation. It was kind of like a mixture of people's opinions. And I really had a realization at that point that to be authentic, especially in a conversation with another person, we are able to truly be present and listen to what that other person's saying, and then wait until that person's finished, and then say what you feel you want to say, or say what comes up, rather than thinking of what to say before the other person's finished. Because it kind of creates this this conversation that's not really a conversation. It's you're speaking and the other person's thinking of something to say. So they're not really hearing what you're saying. And then you speak and the other person's thinking of something interesting to say, and then they're not really listening. So it's not really a conversation. It's more of, I want you to accept me so I'm going to think of something interesting to say. And this need for acceptance, I think, really distorts our ability to converse on a true level, I suppose. So from my experience of being able to be more authentic, it brings a lot more confidence to be able to sit and listen and not have to think of something interesting to say, and to trust that the right thing will come in the right moment. And if nothing comes, then there's nothing to say, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And without wanting to bring in too much theory, but that is exactly what Otto Scharmer calls generative dialogue. Where you get together and really listen to each other, and out of that you generate something new. So out of that dialogue, you don't only reinforce what you already know, you're not only downloading, as he calls it, but you are actually creating new insights for yourself. You create new epiphanies, and that is where personal growth can set in.
Nice. Very nice. So what do you feel then when it comes to, I mean, we've obviously dived into the why. It's difficult, I suppose, for us to be authentic when it really isn't. But I suppose understanding that it's more so our identification with our conditioned self that makes it seem difficult, because of the fact that we've identified with this person for so long. And I refer to this other person sometimes in my coaching as like having a negative twin that follows you around everywhere. And this negative twin will always want you to act through limitation or fear. And this negative twin will always kind of say things over your shoulder or whisper it into your ear. And maybe when you've identified with this negative twin all your life, you always act the same way as your negative twin does. But then when you decide to be more authentic, you start to move away from this other person, this negative twin, and you start to say what you want to say. But this negative twin will get very angry and say that you shouldn't do this, you should do that. And I feel, using that analogy for myself and others, it really helps us to disidentify from this other person, which we all kind of have, this internal dialogue, these limitations, to then create space to be able to say what we want to say and do what we want to do, rather than allow ourselves to be dictated by this conditioning. So that it does, in my eyes, I don't know what you think about this, this transition, because it feels like a transition from being completely identified with this other person, which brings obviously unauthenticity, because we're constantly acting through conditioning, limitations, and a need for acceptance, to transition then over to this authentic self, this true self. It does bring a lot of fear. What have you experienced yourself, kind of moving through this transition? I'll be interested to hear, actually.
Beautiful question. And what my realization is that it is not actually a twin in that sense, but it's me. It's my inner child.
Yeah.
So I realized that the voice of fear that is holding me back so many times is an inner child that feels insecure, feels unsafe, and is longing for attention and for protection. And so the first thing is not to judge this voice, but really to accept it and to give it space and to listen to it. And the fascinating thing is that the inner child not only has this dark side, or this side where it limits me, but this is also where my highest potential is. If the inner child is in support and is aligned with my current self, then it is the greatest source of energy. Then I have the childlike energy to play around all day. And the only price I have to pay is to listen to this inner child once in a while. as soon as I reach a limitation, as soon as I reach a resistance and realize, oh, I don't really feel safe right now, my practice is to retreat and to see what is it actually inside of myself? Where am I not feeling safe? Where is there fear? And how can I really take care of my inner child? And I had a beautiful experience, which just happened last weekend, actually. So it's really fresh and very powerful.
Okay.
So for me, my realization was that a lot of times I still abandoned my small Jonathan, the Jonathan who is probably 3 to 16 years old. And within that range, a lot of things happened in my life that have been painful. Like for all of us, I guess we all experience painful things in our childhood. And there were situations where I was so ashamed of myself that I abandoned myself. And so this last weekend, I realized I will not abandon myself anymore. I will stay with this small Jonathan whatsoever. That is what he always longed for, like a big brother who's always there unconditionally of what he does. And there was a situation in my childhood where I peed myself, and I was really ashamed of that. I peed my pants, and until last weekend, I realized I was still ashamed of that. And I thought, oh, I don't want that part of myself. I don't want the Jonathan that peed his pants. And I realized, no, I'm going to stop this now. I'm going to stand next to him, holding his hand while he's peeing his pants, and I will not let him go, whatever other people say. And I realized by doing this, I gave myself something that I've been longing for other people to give me. I wanted the approval of other people to stay with me like I'm now standing with myself. And that is such a beautiful gift. I feel such gratitude for having me as a friend now who never leaves my side.
That's beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing. And I think that's a really, really, really nice example of the transition to really listen to this voice and accept it. And it is actually fascinating when you work with other people and you really start to get to the core of why they are suffering or why they feel limited, and it always goes back to childhood. And it always seems to be pre 7 years old, because that's the time period, the first 7 years that were really open and suggestible, really operating from our subconscious. So it's interesting you mention this and bring this story up and share that, because yeah, it is fascinating to see how much we can judge ourselves or reject certain parts of ourselves, things that have happened in the past. And I suppose this is a really interesting part of what I kind of refer to as the transition over to being more authentic, is to be able to accept, like you said, that these parts that have been ignored. But I think for a lot of people, they're not even willing to look and see and really allow themselves to turn around into the shadow and to look into it and to say, okay, I'm not going to run anymore. I'm not going to avoid. I'm not going to distract myself. I'm going to really look into this darkness and to face what's been trying to get my attention my entire life. And to allow myself to be completely open to whatever happens. And it is actually fascinating when you open up to this and you take away certain stigmas attached to being, I suppose, even a man. And I had a situation, an experience just a few days ago myself, actually, and I was with my partner and we were just laying on the bed, we were chilling out, and all of a sudden I felt very safe, I felt very open in this moment, and all of a sudden this sadness just came up out of nowhere. Out of absolutely nowhere, and I didn't really have a reason. I didn't really have a trigger. There wasn't any memory attached to this sadness. It was just this flood of emotion that wanted to come up. And I just started to cry. I just started to cry and cry and cry. And she asked what was wrong, and I said, "Oh, well, I don't know." And I really felt that it was old emotion that needed to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily enough, obviously my partner's very understanding, and she kind of just intuitively held the space and laid there, and I just cried, and this stuff came up. And luckily enough for me too, I'm in much more of a comfortable position in my life now, and place in my life to be able to be vulnerable. And I mean, this can be a completely different topic, the power of vulnerability, because there is a tremendous amount of power in vulnerability. But I do think it's kind of like the bridge over to being authentic is to be able to and be willing to be vulnerable, and to be willing to, like you said, to allow this inner child, this other person, this twin, whatever label you want to give, and listen and be there and allow yourself to hear it, but not, I suppose, in my eyes, not be controlled by it anymore. And I suppose when you're able to hear what's being said and to listen, then the voice slowly gets quieter and quieter. And just like if you do ignore a child, it will scream and shout and stamp its feet and cry. And that's kind of like what's going on within ourselves too.
Mm-hmm. To me, it feels like building a relationship. And the first thing, if you want to build a really trustful relationship, is to establish that feeling and the level of trust that both parties know, you're there and you will stay. To really have that trust. And in the beginning, I had similar experiences like you just described, where I've been really sad and crying for long periods of time, actually, sometimes for an hour or even longer. And I realized the more I did that and really stayed with me and really allowed the feelings, the less it became. It became less often, and it became less intense. It became less long. So sometimes just sitting down or lying down on the bed for 5 minutes, holding myself, was the most powerful thing I could do. And then after that, I had so much more energy. I could stand up, and it was a totally different mood. I was in a totally different state.
Yeah. So
it feels like once the old memories, the old feelings have been, or the old emotions have been felt, that there is some kind of release, and that you can really float on from there more easily, and that there is some trust given by the inner child that says, I know you will listen to me when I call you.
Yeah. And it's kind of like these emotions, or even the beliefs that are part of the conditioning that's preventing us from being authentic, this self that we've identified with, it will always make itself known. And the layers that seem to separate us, I referred to as a wall earlier, but I also see it as like layers of an onion that layer up over time, and these layers will kind of drown out the connection, or cut off the connection that we have with ourselves. And it's like one layer will be there. Maybe we experienced something traumatic when we was a child, and we didn't know how to process the emotion at the time. So then we kind of hold on and suppress the emotion. Obviously, society in general, I think, is lacking tremendously the education as to how to process emotions and to allow certain emotions to be felt. We're conditioned to believe that we should always be happy, and to never be sad, to never be angry. And then that creates this distortion in our view of what emotions are, and we become very afraid of sadness or anger, and we don't want to feel these emotions, so we kind of run away from them, and we're always chasing this elusive happiness. But then that really does create and add to these layers, because when we're not listening to these emotions as they arise, we suppress them, and we build another layer. And then over time, you can have a huge amount of layers, let's say, of anger, and all it takes is somebody, that person might be driving who's got all these layers of anger, and somebody can just maybe cut in front of them and they can completely lose the shit, you know, and go mental. Yeah. And the reason I use this as an example is because I was reading a paper in London when I lived in London, and this actually happened to a man, and he was just driving with his family in the car, and somebody drove in front of him and cut in front of him, and he completely lost it. And he chased this guy, cut in front of him, got out of his car, pulled the other guy out of his car, and beat this guy to death. And then sat on the curb and waited for the police to come and arrest him. And he said in court that he didn't know what happened. He didn't know what came over him. It became somebody else. So I think allowing our emotions to be felt when they arise is very important, because otherwise they build up until something has to give. And unfortunately for him, everything came out at once and he didn't have any control. He lost all consciousness, and he was just acting completely unconsciously and did something that he wouldn't have done if he was himself. So I think it's like these emotions and things and all the stuff from our past, it's like it can come in waves. And I don't know what you feel about this from your experience and the people you've worked with, but when these waves come, I think it's very important to allow them, to be with them, to feel them, to surrender to them, no matter what's there, because emotions are energy and they want to come and go. Just like joy, we embrace joy, it comes and it leaves, it passes through. But these other emotions like sadness, anger, shame, guilt, they come and we push them down, we create another layer, we suppress them. But all we're doing is we're adding to these layers and we're drowning out the connection, we're shutting off the connection that we have with ourselves.
Right. And the thing is, it is not only shutting off the connection with our true authentic self, but also with our real self. And this is what I believe is our true source of energy, where I think our natural state is really of unlimited energy, of unlimited creative potential. But these walls that you've been talking about basically are defense mechanisms. So as a child, we have some painful experiences and we build the defense mechanisms in order that that doesn't happen to us again. The problem with these defense mechanisms is not only that a lot of stuff builds up behind them that bursts out in one outburst, just as you described right now, but also that these are high maintenance infrastructures that require a lot of energy. So the more of these defense mechanisms that you have to protect your false authentic self or your conditioned self, then you will experience that you are generally very low energy in your everyday life. So the more infrastructure you have to keep up, the less energy you have available for creativity, for play, for relationships, and all these kinds of things. You feel very tired quite often. You don't feel very inspired in your work. You feel like your energies, your relationships require a lot of energy. So yeah, the beautiful thing about discovering these defense mechanisms is that you can start to accept them and to realize that you built them as a child to protect yourself. To me, that is the crucial step, not to judge these defense mechanisms, but to see that you did that out of love. The small Jonathan built these defense mechanisms to protect himself and because he loved himself and he didn't know any better. These were the best things that he could do at this point. And by now, Jonathan is 31 years old and he knows how to do it differently. So I can take the small Jonathan by the hand and tell him, listen, I can show you how to do it differently. You can trust me, you are safe here. And let's try to take one of these walls down, step by step. It's beautiful that they're there. And I thank you for having protected me this beautifully so that I made it where I am right now in my life. I'm really grateful that you did this job. But let's try to take them down and see what happens. I'm there now to protect you. And this is where change happens to me. I realize once you accept things, you can allow them to change. And then you have energy in your life that you can put into your projects. You can let it flow into your relationships. You can just enjoy life a lot more if you walk through the world with less fear and with less holding back your impulses. I realize anytime I suppress an impulse, an authentic impulse to do something because of shame or fear, my energy goes down. I get a little more tired. And I get out of a meeting really tired and ask myself, why am I so tired now? What was this kind of meeting? But then I also have the experience that once I really allow myself an authentic impulse, my energy actually rises and I feel more awake and I feel like, oh wow, did I just say that? Did I really dare to do this now? Oh wow, this is exciting. And I feel like energy is flowing to me from the source, from the real self, or wherever it comes from. It doesn't really matter, but I feel the energy is rising if I really allow myself to be more authentic.
Nice. And I think that's a really good how-to that we can move on to now, because obviously this conversation is all about how to be more authentic. So when you talk about these defense mechanisms, what ways could obviously other people that are watching this, and I'm also interested to hear as well, how can they access these defense mechanisms to really see in what way they are potentially holding on to these defense mechanisms that's preventing them from having access to their authenticity.
And I think we are such beautiful beings with such intelligence. It's so amazing because I realize we don't really have to do anything, but it'll come to us. And it shows up as symptoms. We notice frictions in our lives. We notice something that we're not really happy with. And sometimes people come to a coaching session and saying, listen, I have this challenge. I always react in this way to this other person. Or anytime somebody says something about my work, I get really angry. Why is that? And then to look into this. Why are you getting angry? What did he do to make you angry? How did you feel in that situation? And do you know this feeling? Has this feeling been with you in the past already? And oftentimes people say, oh yeah, actually I've been feeling this all my life, since my childhood. And what I often do is to ask people to remember a situation from their childhood where they felt it. Maybe for the first time, it doesn't really matter if it's really the first time, but oftentimes the first situation arises and people say, oh yeah, I remember my dad was doing this to me when I was a child. And then I help people realize that based on this situation, they developed this defense mechanism and how they did that out of love. And as soon as they accept it, I feel a release. Often tears come in that situation when they realize, oh wow, I always did that to myself. I've been always blaming others for the problems in my life, but the painful fact to accept is I've always been holding myself back. Nobody ever held me back, but it was me all the time. And to accept that, to me, when I realized that, that was a feeling of joy and of sadness at the same time. And I was crying and I didn't really know if it was because of joy or because of sadness. And probably it was both. It was a beautiful sadness.
Nice.
And in that moment, you can take a part of yourself back to you, and that is available to yourself again.
Yeah, and obviously then with that, the energy comes, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful...
It needs some practice and some integration into your everyday life, how to really stay with that and how to allow that and how to realize in other situations where this defense mechanism shows up in similar aspects. But yeah, that's really the first step. I realized that sometimes the greatest gift is really accepting what is. As you said, with emotions, with feelings that come up, to give them space and to allow them to acknowledge that these are not bad or wrong, but feelings are just what they are and they want to be felt.
Absolutely. Well, I refer to emotions as energy in motion. Yeah, and beautiful. That speaks for itself, that energy always wants to move and emotions always want to move. They want to come and go. They want to be felt and maybe even expressed and then leave. But yeah, like what we was talking about before, we don't really allow all emotions. And I see that's why we have depleted energy. You was talking about something similar earlier, that I see it as we have access to this constant stream of raw energy that's pulsating through us, and we only allow a proportion of that energy to come because we are blocking the rest down through the belief systems that this energy is passing through, and we move away from a certain part of it because we don't want to feel maybe the sadness, we don't want to feel the anger. But through these difficult emotions and being able to clear this out, we make space for that constant stream of energy. And it's like we're realigning ourselves with that energy. We are accessing that energy because we are saying yes to everything, everything that's coming, everything that's happening. And a realization I had a few years ago that completely changed my life was that everything that was happening to me was actually happening for me to wake up, to wake back up into who I really am. And how I realized that was that working with other people through emotions and belief systems and really starting to see how they might be triggered or how I was triggered by certain situations. The natural kind of way to act when that happens is to react. And you look at society, how reactive everybody is, that a situation comes, it triggers an emotion, they react at the situation, back at it. But through that reaction, they're not really seeing what the situation's pointing to.
Right.
And that's something that I was doing for such a long time until I realized this, and I stopped reacting, and I just was able to take a deep breath after a situation came and triggered the same emotion, to sit and to take a breath and to just watch and be with what had been triggered, not to identify with it, not to act through it, to just be with it. And I felt this. There was a situation in Thailand, actually, this happened. I felt this this kind of release, and the situation that came had been repeating itself for many years, and it just stopped. It was like, by me not reacting to the situation, I kind of snipped the cycle from having to turn up, because what that situation was pointing to, I'd seen it.
Right.
I'd looked at it, I allowed it to be there, and in that process of allowing, being with it, it left, and then the situation wasn't needed anymore.
Exactly.
So for many of us that are trying, I see, to be more authentic, I really do feel that there is that transition and that need really for us to be more willing to put ourselves out there and be more vulnerable, be willing to put ourselves into situations that maybe we fear, that we think will trigger certain emotions, because by doing that, we're allowing ourselves to really shake up and bring to the surface the stuff that's blocking or standing in our way from being who we are, and just accepting it. And then it leaves, and then it creates more space for us to be ourselves.
Right. And what you just have been sharing points to this intelligence that I've been talking about. There's an enormous intelligence that is guiding our lives. That is how I feel it. That will always bring ourselves in situations where we can learn about ourselves. And my feeling is it won't go away until we have really learned the lesson that we are to learn. And certain situations will always repeat in our lives until we have really taken it in. And yeah, so there is an enormous intelligence that is guiding us in a sense. And yeah, so this is just something that I feel we can also trust very deeply.
I also see that intelligence is us. It's kind of like we're guiding ourselves. It's like we are kind of, if you want to call it the higher self or the true self, that we are kind of calling situations to ourselves to trigger the ego, the conditioning, the wounded child, so that it's able to come from its dormant phase and to come to the surface. Because what better way for us to be able to witness and see what's standing in our way, because we are essentially standing in our own way to being ourselves. So by calling these situations in to trigger what's standing in our way, we can then see it and then decide in that moment, well, am I going to allow this this part of me, this wounded part of me, this this belief, this fear, this trauma to control my decisions anymore? Right. Am I going to listen to it, be with it, and allow it to leave? If so, then I see there's so much power in this, and working with myself and other people and being able to really change my conditioning and views on what it means to be courageous, or what it means to be strong. When I was a child, I had this idea, or when I was growing more into an adult, that to cry, especially as a man, to show my emotions to people, when people ask how I am, for me to say, I feel sad today, you know, it wouldn't ever happen, because I was so caught up in the judgment, or my own judgment on being emotional, crying in public or sharing my emotions, that I shut that side away. But for me now, it's the complete opposite, that I now realize that courage and strength really lies in us being able to be emotional, allow these emotions to come up, be vulnerable, share how we feel. We don't have to go outside and shout it to everybody on the street, but just to be open and honest, because in that vulnerability lies, it's like the doorway into authenticity. Yeah. It leads to us being ourselves, because we're clearing out what's standing in the way. And I think it's a truly powerful process, and it's a beautiful process to go through.
And I would like to add a small detail to what you said before on having a small pause between reacting to a situation, really taking a deep breath and seeing what arises before you react automatically. I love the English word responsibility. And I feel that only when you do this, if you breathe and have a short moment of reflection before you react, you can really have the ability to respond. You can respond creatively, and only then you can react responsively. You can really respond to the situation, and you're not reacting to your internal dialogue or your internal image of what you think is happening, but you're really responding to the other person or to the situation that is actually there. Otherwise, you're always walking around in like a shadow theater, and you see monsters everywhere and everybody's against me, and you have this kind of a horror trip, but actually it is just your projection on the outside world. And if you are able to have a small pause and step back for a moment and to reflect, what is really happening right now? Then you might discover something that allows you more opportunities on how to react to the situation and to respond creatively.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really, really true. And I kind of, I use the word action, positive action instead of negative reaction. And I mean, I don't like using the word negative, but when you look at the word react, when we react, we're having to react the same situation over and over again. And the situation will keep coming and coming and coming and keep pointing to the same place. And the situation doesn't care. Life doesn't care. You know, if we're suffering, it's just like, well, I'll keep coming. I'll keep pointing to the same place. You're not listening. You're not seeing what I'm pointing to. And it will just get harder, and the situation will get more intense. And until for many people, it can get to the point where the pain is just so unbearable that they can't take it anymore. And in that moment, there seems to be a transformation into authenticity, because the pain has become so intense. But we don't have to go down that route. It doesn't have to be so intense. It doesn't have to be so painful to move over to being ourselves, because a situation comes, it triggers an emotion. We say, okay, well, what's been triggered? Let's take a look at this. Let's be more aware of this. Let me allow this and sit with it, rather than reacting at the situation, because that cycle will just keep coming and keep coming. And I think we strengthen it the more that we react. Yeah. So by being with what's there, allowing ourselves to see what's there, we are truly allowing that cycle to be broken, and in the process guide ourselves, I suppose, back into ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And on sharing a few practical ways on how to implement that, sometimes it's really difficult for me to hold space for myself, especially if there are really intense emotions coming up. sometimes I don't really know what is happening, and I feel really blurry, I feel down, I feel depressed, and I don't really know why that is. And so it takes some courage, but I established a network of friends that I trust deeply, that I can just go to and say, listen, there's something happening within me. Would you be willing to hold a space for me? And we can look at this together. And I trust them so deeply that I know they will guide me and hold me in that space and be able to accept more what is happening than I am in that situation. And I feel as soon as there is a space that is not a field of judgment, but of acceptance, then something is really allowed to show up. And it's beautiful to have this kind of a support system. Sounds so technical. It's actually something very soft and gentle, but to have these kind of people around you in your life and to have them wherever you go. So even if you are at a party and you feel like something's happening, I feel stuck inside myself, I feel shy, I don't know what's happening, to have somebody to go to and approach them and say, listen, I could need some support now. Would you be willing to give me a few of your minutes? And the most powerful thing is actually to do this with people you haven't really gotten to know yet. It's such a deep connection. If you approach somebody so courageously and say, hey, listen, I would like to share something with you. Would you be willing to listen what's happening with me right now? You have to be a little sensitive. Who can really hold that space? But I feel that it's not so difficult to develop a sensitivity and a feeling of who is actually capable of holding such a space, and then it can build the most powerful relationships because you go really deep really quickly.
Yeah, and we've experienced that in the coaching group that we hold. I mean, I've not been there for a little while, but there's a tremendous amount of power, and I suppose we're lucky enough to have such open and authentic people to be able to open up with. But maybe for those who haven't got that, maybe there are people that feel isolated, they're not really able to have that kind of support. Maybe they're living in an environment that the people that they see as their friends and family don't really understand maybe what they're going through. I know that that was something that I had to deal with a little bit, that transition over, just to get that confusion from other people. So I feel that there's also a way that individually we can use a bit of inquiry, self-inquiry in any moment to be able to be more authentic. And the question, I really feel that questions are truly powerful, because when we ask ourselves questions, if we're quiet enough and we're willing to hear the answer, we'll always receive it. And when anybody is wanting to be more authentic, be more just themselves, I feel a very simple yet powerful question is to ask, well, first of all, I know that I love being myself. I know that when I am myself, I feel connected, I feel energized, I feel joy. I feel that I'm able to just be expressive without any resistance, and that feeling of being authentic feels amazing. So the question to ask ourselves is, what must I believe to fear being myself? What must I believe to be true to fear being myself? And then just to sit and to allow the answer to come, and maybe even allow the pictures to come. That's one question. Another question can be, if I was to be myself, if I was to fully be myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? And that's another question to take us deep inside, because then we start to get answers come up, we start to see pictures, and those answers and those pictures will really guide us to the resistance, and that resistance will be linked to a belief. And by being able to start to see how we're limiting ourselves and resisting being ourselves, we can start to question that. Once you have the belief, if it's several beliefs, you can start to challenge the beliefs, to ask, well, do I believe the belief also? Because we can have a belief that's running unconsciously and that we're aligned with, and we have no idea, and all we experience is this resistance and this fear of wanting to be authentic. But when we ask the questions that exposes the belief or the beliefs, then we can challenge the belief. And I feel this self-inquiry is really powerful, because we are turning around, like we said earlier, and starting to question what's been dictating our lives, like a puppet master just making us dance in a certain way. And then once we start to discredit the beliefs, if you find a belief and you ask, well, do I believe this belief? And really sit with the answer, and you say no, then okay, well, I choose to not believe this belief anymore. I choose to align with something that's more empowering. And I feel that this is really powerful, to be able to start to move away from what's pulling us back and trying to stop us from being ourselves. And I feel that the underlying reason is always, mostly always, to keep us safe, and safe in the eyes of our conditioned self, our ego, to keep us in this box. If you stay here, if you live this way, then there's less chance of you excelling and being so authentic that maybe people won't accept you for this person that you're being. And if you're not accepted, that means you're being rejected, and that rejection, oh my God, that's terrible, because it will hurt. So don't risk it, stay in this box. So when we're able to really start to see this other person that's pulling us back, we can start to separate from this resistance and move more into alignment with who we are.
And I think it's a beautiful question to inquire. And if you're curious and want to play, you can also ask the opposite question and ask yourself, not what's the worst that could happen, but also what's the best that could happen if you're truly yourself.
Yeah.
So you've been talking about questions. I'm not sure what time we agreed upon to bring in some questions from the audience. Do you have an eye on the thought?
Well, I can ask now, if there's anybody that's watching that wants to ask any questions, if there's any uncertainties or anything you don't understand, anything you need help with, any questions that you'd like to ask now, me and Jonathan will open the door for you to ask them questions. We'll gladly answer them for the next several minutes, and hopefully we'll be able to help you move over to be more authentic. And whilst we're waiting for any questions, I want to add to what you were just saying there at the end, which is once you're able to kind of find the limiting belief or the limitations, and to see the resistance of what's been holding you back, and being able to discredit that and separate yourself from it, I agree it's extremely important to empower and start to realign with who we really are, the authenticity. And another way to do that is to ask another question. Well, what would my life look like if I didn't have this belief? What would my life look like if I didn't have this resistance? And then sit back and allow your imagination to bring the pictures. And once you start to see yourself living this way, free of limitation, free of resistance, you can say, well, you can start to see all the characteristics that are associated with this person who you're seeing living life without the resistance of being authentically you. And once you start to see in your imagination this person acting in a certain way, without the limitations, without the beliefs, without the fears, you can start to witness how is this person acting? How is this person socializing? How is this person expressing themselves? And all the characteristics that you witness this person embodying you can then step into that person, feel how it feels to be this person. And then instead of trying to become who you want to be, you are able to be who you want to become. And then take everything that you've felt and experienced in that visualization and then just be that person and just move the way that person wants to move, speak the way that person wants to speak. And I feel that the separation from questioning your beliefs and then bringing yourself into alignment with who you are, it gives you that excitement, gives you that energy. And the more that you live in line with that person and move the way in the direction that you want to move in, you'll start to reach other limitations, other boundaries, other layers, and you face them the same way. What must I believe to be true in order to feel the way I feel, in order to feel this resistance? And it could be coming from the same belief. And you question it, you do the same. For me, I feel that's really helpful. It's really helped me for my own kind of way out. Yeah.
And my feeling is that it becomes a self-enforcing process. So I wouldn't really say, yeah, maybe on one hand it becomes easier because the resistance becomes less and less. But it's not that at one point you're completely done and you're completely enlightened and it will be completely different. But your attitude towards your fear and pain, at least for me, it really changed. And I'm really very willing to give up my resistance against certain feelings or situations and to develop, sort of a childlike curiosity to really explore myself and to dive deeper and deeper into who I really am and not being held back so much by fear and resistance.
I think that's a beautiful way to approach it too, with curiosity and playfulness, because
that's something I would really like to emphasize. Make it fun. It's really not another carrot to run after. It's not another spiritual practice that you have to excel in, but it's something so gently, like a dance. You're embracing a lover that you are yourself. Make it as much fun and joyful as possible for you. You don't have to sit in a meditation hall for 20 hours meditating. You can really go out in every life situation. You will find yourself. And you can choose the life situations that you are most excited about, that bring you the greatest fun. Mutual friend that we have, he loves partying, and parties are his way of self-development, which is a great way, because if you go to a party, you will meet very different people, very strange people also sometimes. And if you have the perspective that these are not people on the outside, but they are reflecting something to you about yourself, you can have 300, 400 opportunities to meet yourself at one of these parties and learn something about yourself if you try to open up a little more than you used before. So my perspective is also, it's not about perfectionism. It's not about loving everyone right away and integrating everything that you've been excluding from your life, but more about the principle of excellence. Perfectionism is about getting everything perfect. Excellence is about becoming a little better every day. And that is all that it needs.
Beautiful. Yeah, really, really nice. Really, really nice. We don't have any questions, but we have just comments. Lee said, really interesting, was a little skeptical as to how I would find this, but I understand a lot of what you've been talking about, and I can relate to certain things you've been talking about. I'll be looking down this route a lot more. Can't watch anymore as I need to put kids to bed. Fantastic. Alim says, thank you very much. But genuinely interesting, Lee says. So really nice feedback.
Thank you.
I love, yeah. Sissy just said, I love your definition of excellence as well. So nice. So nice, man.
It feels like we could go on for hours and hours and dive deeper and deeper. Beautiful to talk to you, Richard.
Yeah, you too, buddy. You too. And yeah, I agree. It's one of those topics that really opens you up, and there's so many different threads that attach to it that can send you in all these different directions. And I yeah, I'm grateful to be able to share and to talk with you, and yeah, and
oh, there's another question coming up. Do we have time to answer that?
Yeah. Okay. So, Sissy, can you again explain the difference you see in the authentic and true self? So maybe you can. I think that was
yeah.
the
So in the definition that Ken Wilber has, he distinguishes between the absolute and the relative realm. So the absolute as the unlimited potential, where you are unmanifest energy and where there is no duality. But as soon as you enter the realm of the relative, which is where we are speaking right now, where there are words, where there are dualities, right and wrong, good or bad, black and white, these kind of things, then you have the authentic self. And he distinguishes, again, the authentic self into the true authentic self and the false authentic self. So this is his terminology. I don't think it's really the most handy terminology. I really like your words that you used before, the conditioned self, you said, Richard.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you have a true authentic self where you are really, where you peeled the onion, basically, where you have no filters, where you are really who you are in the relative realm. And the false authentic self would be you, but with the layers of shadows in between, where you have all these shadows that sort of filter your perception of reality and how you also reach out to reality. And that is what he calls the false authentic self, that is conditioned by your beliefs, by your fears, by your limitations, and all these shadow aspects. So yeah, this is just one way to look at it, and it's not necessarily the only way or the best way, but it's something that helps me to get a bit of a cognitive map of where we are navigating.
Yeah, and you find that a lot of people are sharing the same kind of information, but it's just using a different language. But it's all coming from the same place. So whether it's true authentic self and false authentic self, or conditioned self, true self, it's all the same thing. But essentially, we can spend a lifetime oscillating, I see, between these two selves, the false self, the true self. And I suppose it's for me, it's about bringing that oscillation over, so I'm here, you know, I'm connected, I'm aligned with who I am as consistently and as often as I can be. So very interesting topic. I guess it's a lifelong question to me about what authenticity is. Yeah, I mean, in my eyes, authenticity is being yourself, to put it quite simply. I mean, but I suppose authenticity might mean something for somebody else.
I think in the description of the Facebook event, you also described it as a paradox, and it actually is. How can you not be who you are? Try that.
Yeah, well, like I said at the beginning, it takes a tremendous amount of effort to not be who we are. And that's why we're so tired. That's why we're so stressed. That's why we suffer so much, because we put so much time and effort and energy into not being who we are, that we suffer. And then when we're able to be ourselves, align, all of a sudden, here presto, we feel all this energy. And it's like, well, holy shit, you know, all I need to do is just be myself. But it sounds so simple, but yet the transition is so difficult because there are so many fears attached to it. There are so many limiting beliefs, false beliefs attached to us being ourselves. So I feel it's like kind of learning to ride a bike again in the beginning. It's like you're stepping into unknown territory, but it's just having complete trust, complete faith, I suppose, that everything will work out. And even if things happen that you don't see as that you think should have happened, it's just embracing that too, and knowing that's also part of the reawakening process. So yeah, we could keep chatting and going, but we did say at the beginning that we had something to give away at the end. So I'll just share that with everybody now before we wrap this up. We'll keep this open for another few minutes. And what me and Jonathan are willing to give away as part of this experience is a free coaching experience that will enable you to dive into your own limitations, really start to face some of your own shadows and resistances that are preventing you from being yourself. So we are opening the door for people to be able to have that experience with either me or Jonathan, to be coached, to dive deep, and to be able to really start to see what it may take in order to make that step, that transition over, and what's obviously been holding you back. So if you're interested and you feel this will be of service to you, all you need to do is just put your name and email in the chat box within the next, I'd say, 5 minutes, and then either me or Jonathan will contact you and we will go through an experience completely free of charge. So we are offering that before we wrap this up. So great. Anything else you want to add, Jonathan, before we start to close this down? I mean, we'll probably start the whole process up again and we could go on for another hour, but I'd be interested to hear if there's anything else you want to add before we finish.
It feels like we've covered so much and there's still so much more that we could touch on. But there's a beautiful quote that I just recently heard from Jason Da Silva. He does these beautiful YouTube videos in his channel, Shots of Art. Totally can recommend that. Really entertaining and very short snippets on beautiful aspects of humanity, basically. And he says, identity is a fluid act of improvisation and not a solid thing. So I think that there's another perspective on it that really sums it up beautifully. A fluid act of improvisation, not a solid thing. This is who we are.
Yeah, I like that. Lee's just asked a question. Actually, it's actually a question I've been asked myself. I've been asking myself until today, but I seem to be dwelling on this topic. Maybe if you want to elaborate on that, Lee, is it the topic of being authentic? Is that what you're referring to? We can wait. There's usually a bit of a delay, so we can carry on. No, I really like that quote, and it's a beautiful. I really see it as a beautiful process too, and it's the kind of process that I call it a process because it does feel like a process. I mean, some people are lucky enough to be snapped out of this other state, and I say luckily enough, I say to and refer to it as, but. You can see how many people that are kind of lost in this, it can feel like a trance at times, that you're lost in this trance, in this illusion, connected and aligned with this false identity, that you lose sight of who you really are. And sometimes life comes and assists in our awakening to really take us back and to see what's going on. And a lot of the times that can come through immense suffering or even a near-death experience. In fact, like I think Brendan Burchard, he had a car crash, and he was completely broke beforehand. His life wasn't really going anywhere, and he was in a car crash, and then he sat on his bonnet afterwards, and he survived this horrific car crash, and he sat, and his whole life flashed before him, and he was able to see himself, his behaviors, his patterns, his limiting beliefs, and he was able to really just see and observe and make a decision in that moment. Okay, I'm not going to go back there because there's too much pain associated with living this way. And he was able to really then move into the area in the direction that he wanted to, and it was then being kind of led by himself, who he really is, and that completely changed his life. And sometimes that kind of has to happen to some people. They're so lost in this illusion and so identified with this conditioning that they lose sight of who they really are, and then life will come and slap them around the face and wake them up for them to say, holy shit, this is what I've been doing, I'm now going to do this. But the transition over doesn't have to be so drastic. We can enjoy the process, like you said, be curious, use the questioning, start to see the resistances, the fears of what's been holding you back from being yourself. And then from that, create your own separation. It might be gradual, it could happen quite quickly, and then separate and then bring yourself back into alignment with who you are, express that self. And it's kind of it's strange at first to be at one with who you are, I suppose. When you're being authentic, it feels a little bit foreign because you've been identified with this other person for so long. But you look back over this process, even though parts of it can be difficult, but you wouldn't change it. Well, I wouldn't change it, because you really appreciate yourself a lot more through the pain that you've experienced.
And one of my favorite spiritual philosophers is Alan Watts, and he also uses this quote, this metaphor of the onion. And he says, the thing about the onion is you will never reach the center. You can peel and peel as much as you want, and you will never really get to the point where you found the center of the onion, because there's just another layer of peel. And so this is also another reminder for me to really enjoy that process, to really, not rush it, not try to reach a goal, because that is when stress arises. As soon as a goal becomes more important than the path that you're walking, it will end up in stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So be completely surrendered to the process and know that, and have trust that everything that's happening is happening to help. And I suppose for me, the word faith, not in a religious sense, is to know that everything that's happening is happening to help me, and not to confuse faith in the sense of everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be great, situations are going to be amazing. It's more, whatever comes my way, I know is coming my way to help me, even if it sucks, even if it's going to bring pain. I know that it's happening to help. In my eyes, that's what faith is, because then you're able to stay connected to that knowing, that trust inside, and move through that experience without trying to avoid it, run away from it, suppress it. And then once you come to the other side, you're able to see, well, how amazing was this? Because this needed to happen for me to see what I needed to let go of, so that I could be more aligned with who I am, more authentic.
Right. And at that point, the stones in your way become the building blocks of your future.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Sweet. High five on that.
Yeah, high five. Nice that we ended on a super spiritual, religious feel.
Bit of chicken for the soul.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some emails come through for the coaching. So well, obviously anybody else that's watching this as a recorded version, feel free to still contact either me or Jonathan.
And you have a website, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you'd like to share that.
Yeah. We both have websites. We both have email addresses. So I will leave underneath the video that this will be uploaded to YouTube. I'll leave mine and Jonathan's contact details. If you feel like you want to contact me or Jonathan to discuss anything or share anything or ask us anything, then feel free to do so. But I want to thank you all for listening to this conscious conversation and joining me and Jonathan. I'm super grateful, and thank you too, Jonathan. It's been really nice to converse with you on this beautiful topic.
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and thank you, Richard, for hosting and for initiating and for inviting me. It's been a great joy, and I look forward for our future conscious conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Right. Cool. Take care.
Have a beautiful evening, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.